Welcome to my channel, Kelly Rene Everyday, where I'm here dedicated to teaching you the fundamentals of crochet through beginner-friendly projects. Today, I am going to be walking you through how to create the Desert Bloom crochet scarf that we see here. Now, this is truly beginner-friendly for a couple reasons. Number one, you only need to know 3 fundamental stitches, which I'll be demonstrating here today: the chain, the single, and the double crochet. Additionally, there are no color changes here. These color changes happen automatically in the stealth striping yarn that we see here, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a while. So truly beginner friendly. The yarn, like I like to say, does all the work for us, and we get these beautiful colors switching from one to the next. So super beginner friendly. Now, you will find the written pattern for this and many other projects at my website, kellyreneeveryday.com. I will put the link down in the description below. Now, if you find that you like this video and you find it helpful, I would truly love for you to like it. But also, if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will answer them. And lastly, if you so desire, I would love if you would subscribe to my channel, because that way you'll be notified every time I upload any new projects. So with that, I think we are ready to get into things. We're ready to talk about supplies. So to start off with, let's look at our yarns. So we are going to need 1 Caron latte cakes, and the color that we see here is called Plum Fresh, and it is a 5 bulky yarn, and it has 530 yards on it, or 485 meters. Okay, so in this cake we see the swirls, if you would, that transition all the beautiful colors that we see here. Okay, so there is no color changes. We just naturally let them happen. Okay, now my scarf, as I made it here, and we'll talk about the multiples when we get into getting started, but this is 13 inches wide, and one cake is going to create 74 to 75 inches long. So just one of these latte cakes. Now, it is mixed with a base yarn. We're going to be holding 2 yarns together, and that base yarn is going to be the I Love This yarn in Antique White. Now, this yarn is considered an economy yarn, and it happens to be a number 4, get nice and close here, number 4 weight yarn. And on each one of these skeins, there are 355 yards, or 325 meters. So you do need 2 of these to go along with and be able to get to the end along with our latte cakes. Okay, now if you have some number 4 weight yarn that is white, that'll work perfectly fine. I'm just going to say, in my opinion, I Love This yarn is a little bit softer than some of the economy yarns, but it truly, I mean, any number 4 white yarn is going to work for you, and you're still going to get the same effect. Okay, so 2 of these. Now, additionally, we're going to need a crochet hook. Because we're going to be holding the 2 yarns together, we are going to be using, what I used for this project was an L11 or an 8mm hook. This happens to be a Susan Bates, and I kind of like those, but any 8mm hook will do. Additionally, you're going to need a scissors to cut off when you need to, and then a yarn needle just to weave in the couple ends that we end up with, because again, no color changes here. We are doing it all with our beautiful cake. Now, I will leave links for these supplies in the description down below, but if you go to my website at kellyreneeveryday.com and find my pattern, they'll all be listed there as well. Now, if you prefer to get them in person and you happen to have the 2 stores where I got these, Caron latte cakes are found at Michael's, and the I Love This yarn brand is going to be a Hobby Lobby yarn. So if you happen to have those stores locally like I do, you can certainly pick those up there. Or, like I said, I will have the links down below for you as well. Okay, I think we're ready to start making the scarf. Before we get into actually doing the foundational chain, I wanted to talk a little bit about the process and the multiples that we have here. This way, you can create the scarf however wide or narrow that you want it to be, or even make it into a blanket. This is a perfect stitch for a blanket as well. So, the size that I have here, as we said earlier, is 13 inches wide, and I have a total of 8 granny clusters. Now, a granny cluster, as we look here, I'm going to kind of bring this up, and I'm going to look at the pink one. I think it might be a little easier to see. There are 3 double crochets here in a granny cluster in one spot. okay? Now a granny cluster requires 3 stitches across it. That's its multiple. But then we need to add some extra chains so that we can make the corner and turn. So the foundational chain needs to be in multiples of 3 plus 5. So when I count across here for the size that I have, 13 inches wide, if I count, and I'm going to start on this row here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 granny clusters. And that's going to be consistent in each one of my rows. 8 granny clusters. So 8 times 3 is 24, plus 5 is 29. My foundational chain is going to be 29 chains long. After I get my foundational chain made, I am then going to do 1 row of single crochets back. I like 1 row to start any project of single crochets because I think it gives it a nicer edge. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start then a row of our granny clusters, and then after that is going to be our 1 row repeat going back and forth. So we are going to get a chance to see the first couple rows here, how we get started, and then also how we finish. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to be pulling our yarn out. Like I said earlier, we are going to be holding 2 strands of yarn together. So what that means is we need to, I like to do center pulls whenever I can. And this yarn, the I Love This yarn pulls out really nicely from the center. So I've pulled that out. And then I also am pulling out of the center of my latte cakes. Now, it's a choice of yours, depending on how you want to start your scarf, or if there's a color that you want to start with. Maybe you want to start on the outside, so you can pull it from the outside or from the inside. I usually go with whatever the inside is, because this then does unwind really nicely from the center pull. Now, when I did that, I pulled out a bunch, and now I just pull this along. So I've got the 2 strands together as I get started, and then I continue to do this as I go along. So now, just like we do for any other project, we are going to get our yarn and our hook with a slip knot. Okay, I'm going to kind of move this out of the way a little bit. All right, so a slip knot, how I create a slip knot, I'm going to kind of scooch in here so you can see. I simply go around my 2 fingers here and a half. I call it 1.5 around. I bring those 2 loops up through the middle, and then I put my hook on my yarn. Now, if you are interested in learning how to crochet, if you're in the early stages and you need some good fundamental instruction, I do have a video where it's called Learn to Crochet in 2 hours, and it walks through this really slowed down, and it's a great way that if you need to learn how to hold the yarn, how to get your slip knot on, and how to do chains and single crochets. Perfect little course for that. And like I said, it's not a 2-hour long video, but by doing the practice and such that I suggest, it would be about 2 hours and you're up and running crocheting. So I will leave a link for that video in the description down below. So once we have our slip knot on, now we're going to chain our 29. Okay, so remember, multiples of 3 plus 5. So if I want 8 granny clusters, that's 3 times 8 plus 5. So 29 is going to be my total. So I'm simply going to hold my yarn, and whether you go once around or twice, but I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull that yarn through the loop from my slip knot. That's 1 chain. Then I'm going to continue. This is going to be 2. Now, something to consider here is you want this to be on the loose side. If you do it on the tight side, what's going to happen is that side of the scarf, that first row, is going to kind of be narrower than the rest. So you want to make this a little loose so it's nice and even all the way down. So 2, yarn over, pull through 3, 4, 5. And what I want you to do is I want you to get a chain that is 29 chains long. So as we look here, 1 chain is going to be what we call the V's, or I like to think that they're braids. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where our loop is coming out of, is our last chain. We're going to continue on. So I'm going to, off camera, get up to 29, and I will be back to continue on. So if you wanted to stop here and then get me back on when you're done with your 29 chains, we'll be at the very same spot. So now we have our 29 chains, and we're ready to start our first row. We are going to do a single crochet in each of the chains going back, starting with the 2nd chain from our hook. So as we look here, and I'm going to zoom in again so you can see nice and close. As we look here, our loop is on our hook, and the the chain that it's coming out of is the first chain on our row. So we're going to actually single crochet in the next chain, or the second chain from our hook. So our hook is here, 1, 2, second chain from our hook. Now to single crochet, we are going to go directly into the chain. So we're just going to go underneath the one side of the chain. So remember, there's two V's. There's a side here and here, and we're going to go right into the one side. And we're going to yarn over. We're going to pull up a loop. We're going to have 2 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over one more time and pull through those 2. That was our first single crochet. And then we're going to do another one in the next chain. So right next to it, there's another chain, and we're going to go directly in. We're going to yarn over, pull up our loop through and up. Then we're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull through both. Okay? Now what naturally happens on the top of that single crochet, we now have a new V stitch, which looks just like our chain did. So we have a V here and a V there. And that's how we count our stitches. We just did 2 stitches. We're going to go in again to the next chain. We're going to yarn over, pull up our hook, or pull up our loop, 2 loops on. We're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull through both. That was our 3rd single crochet. We're going to continue doing that. So again, go in, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. So going to continue to single crochet all the way down our chain till the very last chain. So we'll have a total of 28 single crochets at the end, because remember, we skipped that first chain on the start. So I'm going to add my single crochets all the way to the end, and I'll be back to show you how to turn and start our first official Granny Stripes row. Now I have my single crochets on my very first row going all the way across. Now, it is always important to make sure you have the right count as you go, and it's easier to check it in the early part than later. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how to count your stitches. So I took my hook out, and I'm going to leave that loop on the top here, but as I look at the top of my stitches here is where, and I know we have the 2 strands coming here, but if we kind of look at more the pink than the white together, here is a V, okay? That's my first stitch. That's where my loop is coming out of. So that's my first single crochet from the first row. Then I'm going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to kind of put this in here and kind of move it up. Then I'm going to have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Move it up. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, okay? And then at the very end here, we've got 26, 27, and coming around the corner, this last one is 28, okay? So I have the correct count to get started, because remember, we started our foundation with 29. We did a single crochet in the second chain, so that means we lost a chain. So now that means we're going to have 28 stitches total, and that's exactly where we want to be. So I am going to put my hook back in, and I am going to chain 2, okay? And I'm going to turn my work, okay? Now that chain 2 really doesn't count as anything, and we are always going to put in the very start, the very first stitch, we're going to be putting a double crochet on every row. So we're always going to chain 2, and the first thing we're going to do is do a double crochet. Now, it's going to go into the first stitch on this row. So if you look at the top here, here's our single crochet. We are going to go into right underneath those 2 V's. So I'm going to yarn over for a double crochet. I always start with a yarn over. I'm going to go in under those 2 V's, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. I now have 3 loops on my hook. Then I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull through just 2, so there'll be 2 loops on my hook. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull through the last 2. Once I'm down to 1 loop on my hook, I have finished my stitch, okay? So double crochet in that first one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to skip 2 stitches. So as we look at the chain, here's 1 stitch, 2 stitch, and as we look at the side, here's 1 stitch, 2 stitch. We're going to skip those 2. And in the 3rd stitch from where we're at, we are going to put 3 double crochets into the 1 stitch. So let me get my yarn back around my fingers here. We're going to skip 2, okay? Skip 2, kind of get in the middle here. I want to be sure you can see this. All right. because that's the important part of knowing where you're looking. So again, we're going to skip 2, so skip, skip, and we're going to do 3 double crochets into this one. So I'm going to start by yarning over. I'm going to go into that stitch. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop. I've got 3 on. Yarn over, pull through just 2. And I'm going to yarn over and pull through the last 2. Now, probably the challenge and what's a little bit different than crocheting with one is you always are pulling up 2 strands on each one of your loops. So always make sure you've got white with whatever color you're currently on. And then we're going to yarn over. We're going to go back into that very same stitch. And we're going to yarn over, pull up a loop. We've got 3 on. Yarn over, pull through just 2. Yarn over, and we're going to pull through the last 2. So that's 2 double crochets in that stitch. To create that granny cluster, we need a 3rd one. So we're going to yarn over. We're going to go back into that same spot with our 3rd double crochet. And now when we get done with this one, we have created our first granny cluster. A granny cluster is always 3 double crochets in 1 stitch. Okay. Now we're going to skip 2 and we're going to do another 3 double crochets in that 3rd stitch from where we're at. So skip 2, and in this one right here, we're going to do 3 double crochets. So we're going to yarn over first. We're going to go into that stitch, yarn over, pull up our loop, 3 on, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and we're going to pull through the last 2. So that's our first double crochet. Second double crochet, back into that same spot. And my 3rd double crochet is going to go right back in to complete the 2nd granny cluster. So as we look at our row here, okay, this was our double crochet. This was our chain, 2 double crochet into the first stitch. Skip 2, 3 double crochets, a granny cluster in the next. Skip 2, 3 double crochets for a granny cluster in the next one. So let's do it one more time. We're going to skip 2 and we're going to put 3 double crochets or granny cluster into the next stitch here. So this is 1, yarn over, this is 2 into the same stitch, and 3 into that same stitch. Now what you're going to do is you're going to continue down the line, skip 2, granny cluster, skip 2, granny cluster, until you get to the end. You will have 8 granny clusters. So what you're going to do is you're going to count. Don't count the first start of it. Don't count the chain and the double crochet. The first full granny cluster is your first one, second one, third one, and you are going to count all the way to 8. When you count your 8th one, you're going to have 3 stitches left. I will meet you back when you get to that point. Okay, so now I'm at a point where I am to the end. I have 8 granny clusters. So remember, a granny cluster is the 3 double crochets in a single stitch. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I have the 3 stitches left. So I've got 1, 2, 3. Those are the last 3 stitches on my row. That's exactly where I want to be. So now I end my row on 1 double crochet. So I'm going to skip the 2 just like I was between my granny clusters, and I am going to double crochet in the very last stitch on this row. So remember, this was my turning row, my turning chain. So this last one is kind of sneaking up around the corner. So that is your last full stitch. So we're going to go underneath those 2 V's and we are going to do a double crochet. Okay, and that ends the row. What that's going to do is that's going to kind of square off the end. We started with a double crochet and we're ending with a double crochet. And now we're going to start with our what we call our 1 row repeat. So row 3 is going to be the one that we repeat the rest of the time for the entire length of the scarf. We're going to always chain 2 to the next row. Okay, we're going to turn. Now, as we did on the first one, we are going to start each row on a double crochet. That double crochet is now going to go into the space, not into the stitch. Under the stitch would be right underneath the V's. We are going into the space created between, I'm going to lay this down, between our granny cluster and that last double crochet. Right in this spot right here, this, what we call the granny space, is where we're going to be putting that double crochet. So you're simply going to yarn over. We're going to go into the space, not in the stitch, in the space, pull up that loop, yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2. So that starts our row. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look for, I'm going to lay this back down. We put our double crochet in, and now we're going to do our granny cluster in the space between these two granny clusters. Right here is the space, not in the stitch, in the space. So I'm going to pick this back up. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to do 3 double crochets. Go in, yarn over, pull up my loop. Keep this nice and loose. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And that's my first double crochet in my granny cluster. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go right back in. Again, keep it nice and loose, because if you make it tight, first of all, it's going to be harder to kind of pull things through. But second of all, your fabric is going to be not as drapey and soft feeling. It'll be a little bit more stiff and tight, okay? So your tension, you want to kind of keep loose. So now you're going to see we created our granny cluster in the granny space from the row before. And we're going to continue doing that all the way across. So we're going to yarn over. We're going to do another granny cluster into the space between the 2 granny clusters from the previous row. So yarn over, pull up that loop, 3 on, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And go back in one more time to finish our granny cluster. And we are going to continue that all the way across in each one of the granny spaces. And when we get to the last granny space, all right, we're going to do our last granny cluster. So we got to count here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember, we need 8 granny clusters on each row, and then I'll show you how to finish off. So get your 8 granny clusters in each one of the spaces, and I'll show you how we're going to finish off and turn for our next row. Okay, so I've got what would be my 3rd row. Remember, this is my repeat row. This is my 3rd row, but technically it's the 2nd row of granny clusters. So as we count full granny clusters, remember 3 double crochets. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I will always have 8 on every row. Now I need to end this row. We always end on a double crochet. So now, where to put that double crochet? Remember, on this row before, we had a chain and we had a double crochet. If we pull those apart a little bit, there's a space right there. That's where we're going to put our last double crochet. So I'm simply going to yarn over, and I'm going to go right into that space. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull up a loop. I'm going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And now I have finished that row. Don't forget to end on your double crochet. Otherwise, you won't have a nice straight edge on both sides. Okay. All right. So now that I've ended that stitch, I'm going to simply chain 2 and I'm going to turn. Okay. Chain 2 and turn. Whoopsie. There. Okay. Now I'm ready to get started again. So when we look here, remember, we're always starting on double crochet in the space between the previous row and our first granny cluster. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to go into that space, and we're going to pull up our loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So that's the start of our 4th row. And now we're going to find the space between the granny clusters again. So here's my space between my 1st and 2nd granny clusters. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to put 3 double crochets in there for my 1st granny cluster. Okay, got to get my yarn over here. Okay, and again, nice and loose. This will keep your fabric, if you would, the scarf, a little bit more drapey and soft. Okay, so that's my 1st granny cluster. My 2nd is going to go into the next one. And I keep repeating this very same pattern all the way. Now, what's nice when we get into the granny stripes pattern is that we don't have to count stitches. We just simply count 8 granny clusters across the way. When you have 8 granny clusters, you know that you finished your row. And then you know that you have to end and start on a double crochet, and you can keep going. So I'm going to finish up this row, and I'm going to show you how I end up and finish when I get to the very end of the scarf, my very last row as well. Okay, so now I'm to the end of my row. I am going to count that I have 8 granny clusters. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. So now to end the row, I am going to do a double crochet between what would have been the chain 2 and the first double crochet on the previous row. So I'm going to yarn over, go right in between those two, yarn over, pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and pull through 2. And now that ends my row. Now imagine that I'm to the very end of my scarf and I want to finish this off. You could end right here, just cut your yarn and weave in the ends. That would be totally fine. It really would be okay. But what I did on mine, and I'm gonna pull up the end, okay? Because I started my scarf, if you remember, on a single crochet row, I end on a single crochet row as well. I just think it gives it a little bit nicer edge. So to do that, once you get there, all you need to do is always do a chain 1 on a single crochet. Now, you will notice that I did splice my yarn here, and I just want to show you when you run out of your base yarn, the white, because you need 2 skeins for this. All you're going to do is you're going to tie those 2 together, and you're going to just let it we're going to crochet it in, and then you can just cut those ends at the end. Okay? So, like I said, we're going to chain 1 for the single crochet because we're going to do single crochet across. And then we're simply going to find our first stitch and we're going to do a single crochet into it. So single crochet in, yarn over, pull up that loop. Now notice that my knot is pulling through. Totally fine. Just keep crocheting like it's not even there. And then I'm going to pull through. And then I'm going to continue to do single crochets in each one of the stitches all the way across. Okay, and again, this is just to finish it off. This is optional, but I just think it gives it a nice finished look. So again, go directly into the stitch, not into the spaces here, and you're just going to single crochet across the entire top. Okay, and once you get to the end, you just tie it off, you snip your ends, and you're going to simply weave those ends in. And then like this little spot right here where I've got these little tails, I can just cut those off. All right, very easy. And just make sure your knot is nice and tight. So that concludes our tutorial for the Desert Blossom. I'm sorry, let me get out here. The Desert Blossom Crochet Granny Stripe Scarf. I hope you really enjoyed this. I hope you make it. If you do, let me know. Also, if you have any questions or comments that you want to make, I love to read those and to answer those for you. And again, if you like this, if you found this helpful, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you in our next project. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.